Hello guys, this is Oroth. Welcome back to my channel. And before we begin today's video, I would just like to tell you about another project I'm currently working on, and that is the ultimate free-to-play guide. This guide is useful for anyone, not only those who are free to play. It doesn't matter if you are free to play, if you are mid-tier or high-tier. This video will be useful to anyone, and the purpose of it is to bring up every factor in Diablo Immortal that affects the strength of your build. And I will give clear recommendations on each factor about what you should focus on. What you should focus on when it comes to what items to keep, how you should invest your platinum, and how you should invest your hilts, etc, etc. This video will be very detailed, so it will take some time for me to finish it, because I really wanted to bring up everything that is important so that you don't have to jump between a lot of different videos when you're trying to look for information. So the goal is that you will be able to use this video, and then you can come back to it and go to different types of segments in it to get a grasp about what choices you should make, etc, etc. But enough about that. Today's video is actually another video about damage output. And I have already made a guide about how to improve your total damage output. But what I do when I evaluate what choices I should do with my character, I actually use an Excel spreadsheet. And the point of this video is that I'm gonna go through this spreadsheet together with you guys and show you how it works. And then I'm gonna make it available for all of you to download. So down in the description of this video, you can find a link to my Discord server. And on the Discord server, you will be able to download this spreadsheet. And when you have downloaded it, you can watch this video again, and you can fill it in together with me, because I think that's the easiest way to do it. So let us begin. As you can see here, I have the spreadsheet, and in every blue field here, I'm going to fill in a specific value. And as you can see now, nothing is filled in, it's zeros everywhere. But when we are done filling this in, it will actually give us a clear understanding about the strength of our current build. It will calculate our base damage, but it will also transform this base damage number that you can see on the attribute screen to the actual real damage number that reflects the total damage output of your build. So what I want you to do first is that I want you to equip the build that you're using with all the items and the set pieces, etc. And then I want you to remove all your legendary gems and all the normal gems from your character so that your resonance is 0. Because when your resonance is 0, we can actually see, if we spectate an item, what the base damage is. And some of the items, they will give you health points, and some of the items will give you damage. And the items that will give you damage is the gloves, the head, the shoulders, the main hands, and the off hands. So let's start filling in these numbers, and we're going to use my current build for this. So first of all, we have my gloves. They have a base damage of 512, and they are dropped in Inferno 2, just like my head. That's also 512. And the shoulders, that's also 512. And then we have my first main hand. It's from Inferno 1. It has 942 item base damage. And my first shield has 399. The second main hand also has 942, and my second shield has 370. Important to note here is that if you look on my first shield here, it has a higher base damage compared to my second shield. This is because my first shield is from Inferno 1, while my second shield is from Hell 8. And the reason for why I use a shield from Hell 8 is because the magical attributes is very good on this shield. So, of course, it would be good if I find a better shield from Inferno 2 with the same attributes, because that will raise the base damage of the item. But when I do my calculations, I haven't been able to find a better shield yet, so I still keep this in my build. So now we have filled in all of the item base damage in the E column. And what I want you to do now is that I want you to equip all of your gems again. And remember here that the gems that you put into your gloves, they will actually affect the item, the base item damage of the gloves. So you should put your highest ranked yellow gems into the glove sockets. So if your highest yellow gem is rank 8, you shouldn't put it in your necklace, for example. You should put it in your gloves to make sure that you increase the damage as much as possible. Because damage is a lot more important than health when it comes to PvE content. And this spreadsheet is a PvE spreadsheet. So if we would calculate PvP damage, it doesn't work the same way. So this is for PvE, remember that. So when you have equipped all of your gems, I want you to look at the total amount of ranks in your gloves. So me, for example, I have 2 rank 8 gems socketed in my gloves. And 2 times 8 is 16. So I should write in the number 16 in the G column. The next thing we're going to fill in is our paragon damage. So if you go to your paragon page, you can see the total amount of damage you receive from the points you've put in. And I recommend you to try to put in every point possible on damage and also on armor penetration, because armor penetration also affects your damage output thanks to the fact that it's increasing your critical hit damage. But if you manage to put in all the points in damage, you will get 4,700 damage from your paragon points. What we're gonna do next is that we're gonna put in the damage we get from the Legacy of the Horadrim. And I currently get 300 damage from there. So the next step is to put in all the intelligence that we have on our items. And remember that you also should include the intelligence you get from the upgrade. So for example, whenever you upgrade your helmet, you get an intelligence bonus. And the maximum you can upgrade the helmet to is 30. So if we're going to fill in my values here, if we start with the necklace, for example, 677 intelligence. Then I have 566 intelligence, 632. On my gloves, I don't have any intelligence on it, but I still use it because it has a very good magical attribute. On my waist, I have a total of 578 intelligence. On my feet, I have 589. Oops. And I'm just going to keep filling this in. You can also see here, while I fill these fields in, it starts to increase my base damage. Important to note here is that you also get intelligence or strength from the ancestral tableau or from your demonic remnants, so don't forget to include those here in this J column here. So now we've filled in all of my intelligence that I get. So the next step is to but to put in the values of the tourmalines. And if I look on the tourmaline equipped on my neck, I have 216 damage. And in my waist, a total of 724. So, if I would have a resonance of 0, my base damage would, with my current build, be 12,645. But what resonance does is that it increases the base damage of your items. So every 20 resonance will increase the base damage of an item by 1%. So for example, if I would equip 20 resonance, the base damage of the first shield here would improve by 1% of 399, which is roughly 12. But luckily this spreadsheet will calculate everything for us, so what I have to do is that I just have to put in my resonance here. Let me check real quick. 3835, and voila, all of a sudden my base damage jumps up to 20,677. As I've explained to you in the DPS guide that I made previously and that I uploaded a few weeks ago, the base damage is actually not important to your total damage output. With not important, I just mean that this is not the number you should look at, because what actually matters is what your real hits will be like. And for that, we have a lot of different damage modifiers, and we're going to fill them in here in this spreadsheet. And the point is that it's going to calculate the real average damage that we make. So we convert the base damage number to the real average damage. So let's continue and go through these steps together. So what we're going to do first is that we're going to add our normal damage modifiers into the M column. And in this bracket, we include all the bonuses from magical attributes, from your Reforged bonuses, from awakening effects, essence mastery effects, the charm bonuses, paragon effects, gem resonance effects, and warband remnant effects. I know that I, in my previous video, told you to not include gem resonance effects into this bracket, but I was actually wrong. It should go into this bracket 1. So let's start fill them in together. I have a total of 39.5 primary attack damage. And yes, before we continue, it's also important to say that I only include the modifiers here that are actually affecting my current build. For example, I play the Necromancer and I use my summons. And my summons are not affected by damage done to demons or damage done to elites and some other modifiers. So when you fill in the spreadsheet, you have to think very carefully about, okay, which magical attributes should I use here? Because otherwise the results will not be true to reality. And of course, it's not an exact science. You have to try to think logically a little bit about, okay, which values should I put in here? And if there is something that only affects perhaps 50% of my damage output, maybe I should divide that value by 2. But let's continue. I have a total summon damage of 65.5%. And if I look on the Essence Mastery, here is another thing. It's not an exact science, but I try to see on my essences and see, okay, what is the average damage increase I get on my skills that I'm currently using. And therefore I chose to put in 20% here. I use the Shepherd set. It gives me 15% summon damage. I am using the attacker room in my warband that gives me 3.5% increased damage. Then I also have some warband remnants that I have to include here. So I have Collar of Brutus that gives me 10% extra damage, and I have Typhorus that gives me 6% extra damage. I also have a Coward's Rage that gives me 3% extra damage. If I look on my charm, I have some skills at 4% and some skills at 2%. I choose to put 2% here, just to not exaggerate anything. As the Paragon tree I use the Weaver at the moment, and the Weaver gives me a bonus of 15% extra damage. I also have a few Awakened slots, and it's the same thing here. I try to see, okay, what is the average increase from Awakened effects on my current build, and for me it's 10%. So those are the modifiers on my current build that I include in bracket 1. And as you can see, it already starts to happen some things here. You can see that my base damage is still the same, but the average damage is going up. So let's say that I would have a build with 3,835 resonance, and I had this setup as we have gone through so far. My base damage would go from 20,677 to a real average damage of 59,860. And this is if I would use legendary gems that has no damage modifier effects, or if I wouldn't use any buffs, or if my crit chance would be, if I didn't work with crit chance or critical hit damage or attack speed. And you will see when we start to fill in this number in the spreadsheet, the average damage will go up and up and up a lot. And it will be clear to you why it's important to work with the details, because every change you make to your build will have such a huge, make such a huge difference on the last row on the real damage output that we will see here. So, the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to add all the legendary gem modifiers into the O column here. So if we start with my Blood-Soaked Jade, it gives me a damage bonus of 20.5%. And while I fill this in, now watch this average damage go up all the time. So I fill in 20.5% from Blood-Soaked Jade. I fill in 20.5% from Bottled Hope, 24% from Pain Clasp, and then I get 18% from Follower's Burden, 24% from Bloody Reach, and I also get 16% from Berserker's Eye. So now we have filled in all the damage modifiers from the legendary gems. And the next step will be to add all the damage modifiers from buffs and debuffs. And as you can see here, when you download this spreadsheet, I have actually written down everything here, what you should do step by step. So if you're not able to watch this video while filling this spreadsheet in, you can just read here, and I hope that it will be clear what to do. So when we add the buffs, I'm using a build as a Necromancer where my Bone Wall increases my damage by 40%. And I also use the Poison Golem, which puts a debuff on the target at 10%. So those are the values that I will put into this column, the Q column here. And as I explained in the DPS guide video, you can't have several buffs active at the same time. So for example, if I would invite a monk to my party, and he would use the Inner Sanctuary damage buff at the same time as I am using the Bone Wall buff, the effects will not stack, so it will pick the highest, the strongest buff. And in this case, it would be the Bone Wall buff at 40%, because I think I think that the Monk buff only gives 30%, at least at base value. So the next thing we have to do is that we have to add the damage modifier we get from combat rating. And combat rating is actually very important, for sure, but it's only important to a certain point, because the damage modifier that comes from combat rating is actually capped at 11.3%. And here I see one of the most common mistakes that a lot of people do is that they try to maximize their combat rating as much as possible. But after you reach this cap at 11.3%, it doesn't matter if you keep increasing your combat rating, because it will not affect your damage. So I will say that you can, of course, try to save a set with maximum combat rating, but this is more useful in, for example, PvP or in challenge rifts where you are below the recommended level, or if you do raids where you also are below the recommended level. So it's actually very easy to maximize this combat rating cap, and it will be at 11.3%. So don't make that mistake to switch out an item that has lower combat rating for something with higher combat rating, because if the magical attributes are wrong, it will actually make your build worse than before. And this will be clear when we do these calculations, for sure. So now we have filled in all the damage modifier brackets. Now we're also going to fill in the critical hit chance. So we see here in the T column, I get a total of 22% from magical attributes. I get 18% from the Shepherd set. I get 32% from Mother's Lament. And here we have the Weaver effect. And the Paragon effects that is linked to critical hit chance is actually working a little bit strange. Because if we look at Weaver, for example, it says that it increases your critical hit chance by 6.5%. But this is not exactly how it's working. So when you fill in this value, you have to go up here to where the formula is and write 6.5 here instead. So the real critical hit chance I will get from Weaver is actually 1.8%. Or wait, I also have to fill in the base critical hit chance, which is at 3%. And I also get 2% from Berserker's Eye. So the real critical hit chance increase I get from using the Weaver Paragon tree is currently 1.5%. And if my crit chance would be a lot lower, the effect from the Weaver Paragon tree would be greater. I would see greater number here than 1.5%. So it's diminishing. The higher your critical hit chance is, the lower the effect of the Paragon tree affecting critical hit chance will become. So it doesn't matter if it's Weaver at 6.5% or Mastermind at 10%. It will the effect will grow weaker the higher your critical hit chance is. And as you can see here, the critical hit chance made a huge bump on our real average damage, because at base value every critical hit makes double damage. So of course, if we are able to pump up our critical hit chance, we will start increasing our damage output a lot. But we also have to fill in the values we get from to our critical hit damage. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna see how much critical hit damage does our current armor penetration value give us. So if you go to your attribute screen and hover over armor penetration, you can actually see what your current critical hit damage increase is from armor penetration. And for me, it's 53%. This can never be higher than 57%, I believe. And important to note here is that every difficulty level has a recommended armor penetration value. So for example, I don't know exactly what the recommended level is for Inferno 2, but if you go to the attribute page, you can see this. And you start gaining critical hit damage as soon as your armor penetration is higher than the recommended level. And at the start, you gain a lot of critical hit damage for all the armor penetration you put in. But the closer you are to this cap at 57%, the harder it becomes to increase it further. So if you look on your armor penetration and you go to your attribute screen, if you manage to focus more on armor penetration, maybe you can get it up to at least 40 or 50%, and that's going to be very good and impactful on your damage output. We also have to put in the value for the magical attributes at 27% for me. So this is the, if I look on all my items on the helmet or on the shoulders, you can have the magical attribute critical hit damage. And the critical hit damage increases the damage you do each time you are able to do a critical hit. So basically, the strength of critical hit damage becomes greater and greater if the more you are able to improve your critical hit chance. So if you have a very low critical hit chance, it doesn't matter if you have a lot of critical hit damage, because it will be quite rare that you actually land a critical hit. So keep this in mind. That's why I always recommend anyone to look for as much critical hit chance as possible. So you should never have a helmet equipped, for example, even if it's a triple stat item, if it doesn't have critical hit chance on it. If you have a triple stat item without critical hit chance and you manage to find just a simple helmet with only critical hit chance, you should equip it, because it will increase your damage most likely. You can also increase your critical hit damage from a reforge. And there is also a Warbent Remnant that gives 10% critical hit damage, as long as your critical hit chance is above 70%. And with my current build, whenever Mother's Lament triggers, it will also trigger the Manifest Carnage effect, so therefore I include it. And as I mentioned, the base critical hit damage is always 100%. So as you can see here now, on the average damage, the real damage number, when we have converted the base damage, it has gone from 20,677 to 595,462. But we also have to include attack speed. So currently I'm using the Vexed Curse effect, which gives me 24% attack speed on my summons. I also use the 6-piece Shepherd, which gives me 60% attack speed to my summons. And I also use the Offensive Stance. When it's at burst, when I activate it, it gives me 20% attack speed for 3 seconds, and then it's going to be 10%. But what we're actually doing now is that we are calculating the burst damage, because there are 2 different types of damage. You can call it 2 different types, and that is burst damage. That means when you do a lot of damage in a short period of time, but you also have sustained damage. So how much damage output are you able to perform in a longer fight? And then of course, if we look at Mother's Lament, for example, it gives me 32% critical hit chance when it's active, but it's not active all the time. It can only trigger every 20 seconds. So if you are making calculations for sustained damage, then you have to adjust some of these numbers so that you get a true result. yeah, I also have to mention here that when you are able to build a very strong character, most of the fights will be over before your burst damage starts to wear off. So therefore I tend to always try to optimize my burst damage, because it doesn't matter how well I perform in a longer fight if the fights are over fairly quick. But of course there are some instances where sustained damage is more important. Like if I'm going into the gauntlet with a little bit weaker team perhaps, where I have to carry, then I would try to make a build with better sustained damage instead of burst damage. And there are also some dungeons where sustained damage is more important than burst damage. And yeah, when it comes to dungeons, it's also sometimes a good thing to perhaps switch out 2 pieces of your set to Isotar so you get more movement speed. So everything is depending on the situation. But to demonstrate the spreadsheet, I have chosen to calculate my burst damage right now. So what we have done now is that we have actually filled in this spreadsheet together. And as you can see here, we also have something that I call a score point. So each bracket, if you see here, bracket 1 has a score of 2.9, bracket 2 has a score of 2.23, etc., etc. And I have made this system where this spreadsheet calculates a total score of your build. So what you can do when you use this spreadsheet is that, and you want to maybe compare it with someone else using the spreadsheet, you can look on this build score to see, okay, who has created the strongest build when it comes to damage. So that's just a neat addition to make different builds more comparable. So yes, I mean, this is basically everything you need to know about this damage spreadsheet. I hope that this video was easy to understand and clear to follow. And yeah, I just realized now I actually forgot something in this F column. If you have an item that increases the base item damage of a specific piece, you also have to include this number here in the F column. And on my current build, I actually have, let me see here, I actually have a shield with 3%, so I have to put it in here. And as you will see now, the base damage goes up by 12 because it increased the base item damage of the shield by 3%. So yeah, I mean, now we have gone through this spreadsheet. I know it might be a little bit difficult when there's so many numbers, but don't feel stressed. Take it easy and fill it in carefully. You will find the spreadsheet on my Discord server linked in the description. And I will also be there or here in the comments to try to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, I would just like to wish all of you a very nice day or evening. So see you guys later. Avrath el omno kuro.